Morning, all. All right, so we are up to the 1970-71 season. You will notice two teams have been added to the board, Buffalo and Vancouver. You'll also notice Vancouver's in the East. So the East is comprised of Boston, New York, Montreal, Toronto, Buffalo. So good so far, or so far so good. Vancouver, no, and Detroit, which is fine. Out west, you've got Chicago, St. Louis, Philadelphia, no, Minnesota, LA, Pittsburgh, also no, and Oakland. So NHL knows geography. Boston wins the Eastern Division, 57-14-7 record as the NHL goes to a 78 game schedule. 399 goals scored by those Boston Bruins, 207 goals against, 121 points. They were ridiculous that year. At home, they were 33-4-2. Away from home, 24-10-5. But as I've said over the years, when Boston finishes first overall, it doesn't mean success in the playoffs. The New York Rangers finished with 109 points, record of 49-18-11, 259 goals scored, 177 goals against. At home, they're fantastic, 32-7. Away from home, 19-16-4. Montreal finishes with 97 points, a record of 42-23-13, 291 goals scored, 216 goals against. At home, they're 29-7-3. Away from home, they're 13-16-10. So below 500 away from home. Toronto, they finished fourth. They do make the playoffs. 37-33-8 record. 248 goals scored. 211, goals against. 82 points. 24-9-6 record at home. 13-24-2 record on the road. So they had a hard time away from home. Then we get into the two expansion teams. Buffalo finishes 24-39-15, 217 goals scored, 291 goals against, 63 points, so nowhere near playoffs. Vancouver, worse record than that, 24-46-8 record, 229 goals scored, 296 goals against, 56 points. At home, they're 17-18-4. Away from home, they're 7-28-4. Detroit finishes last. Things are getting ugly in Detroit. 55 points, 22-45-11 record, 209 goals scored, 308 goals against. At home, they're 17-15-7. Away from home, they're 5-30-4. And I did a video yesterday on Alex Delvecchio's career, so that'll be going live while we're on vacation. And it's an interesting career because when he joins the Red Wings, they're a really good, solid team. Everybody's enjoying and they win cups. And by the time he's done with the organization, people don't want to play there. So Chicago wins the West when they're moved to the West. The NHL understanding there's an imbalance, so they move Chicago to the West. 49-20-9 record for Chicago, 107 points, 277 goals scored, 184 goals against. At home, they're 36-3. Away from home, they're 19-14-6. St. Louis a distant second, 34-25-19, 87 points, 223 goals scored, 208 goals against, and suddenly their path to the final is blocked. At home, they're 23-7-9. Away from home, they're 11-18-10. Philadelphia, rough record for them, but things are getting better for the expansion teams. They finished 28-33-17, 207 goals scored, 225 goals against, 73 points overall. At home, they're 20-10-9. Away from home, they're 8-23-8. So, rough road record for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Minnesota North Stars, a record of 28-34-16. So, they had 72 points. 191 goals scored, 223 goals against. At home, they're 16-15-8. Away from home, they're 12-19-8. The LA Kings, 25-40-13 record, 239 goals scored, 303 goals allowed, 63 points for them. At home, they're 17-14-8. Away from home, they're 8-26-5. So again, the 8 wins for a team on the road there. The Pittsburgh Penguins wish they had 8 wins on the road. They finished 21-37-20 on the season. 221 goals scored, 240 goals against, 62 points. At home, they're 18-12-9. Away from home, they're 3-25-11. So that's an ouch, that road record for Pittsburgh. But the Seals are worse than that. 20-53-5 record, 45 points, 199 goals scored, 320 goals against. So this is a rough season for the Seals. 17-21-1 record at home, 3-32-4 record away from home. So that's pretty brutal. And yeah, things are bad right now if you're a fan of the Seals. So the Hawks are moved to the West, as I said, to fix the competitive balance in the league. Um, just looking, yeah, no, that's right. Playoff crossover is meant to fix the issue as well. So we no longer have where teams in the West are playing the West and teams in the East are playing the East once you get to the semifinal. And this is something we've heard talked about when it comes to the current playoff format of maybe doing some sort of crossover once you reach the conference final. The Bruins set the points record in the NHL. They also set a goal scored record with that 399. It's absolutely ridiculous. Dryden is the Habs starter in the playoffs after just starting 6 regular season games. So Ken Dryden makes a really good impression late in the season, and the Montreal Canadiens decide they're going to go with him in the playoffs. Jean Beliveau and Gordie Howe, this is their final season in the NHL. At least it would have been for Gordie Howe, but of course the WHA will coax him out of retirement to play with his sons in Houston. And then, so Beliveau's career is done after this season is done, so he gets to retire with silver trophy at the end of it. June 10th of 1970, Oakland sends the 1971 first rounder to the Habs. Does it matter what they got back? No, because that first round number 1 draft pick becomes Guy Lafleur. So that's tough. The Montreal Canadiens clearly playing chess while the Oakland Seals were playing checkers. January 13th of 1971, the Habs acquire Frank Mahovlich from the Wings for Bill Collins, Guy Chiron, and Mickey Redmond. So there's Mickey Redmond's name on the board. February 25th of 1971, the Bruins score 3 goals in 20 seconds against the Vancouver Canucks to set an NHL record in an 8-3 win. So, lopsided score for Boston against Vancouver. It has happened over the years, not just in the 2011 playoffs. March 18th of 1971, Gilles Perreault gets his 35th goal of the season, which sets a record for rookies. October 29th of 1970, Gordie Howe is the first NHL player to reach 1,000 career assists. March 2nd of 1971, Wayne Cashman is the 9th Bruin to reach 20 goals. That's a record, having 9 20 goal scorers. Absolutely crazy. March 20th of 1971, Dave and Ken Dryden square off against each other. For the first time, we see 2 brothers against each other. Dave Dryden for Buffalo, Ken Dryden for Montreal. Dave Dryden ends up having a pretty good career. But of course, when your brother's Ken Dryden, I mean, you're not as memorable as Ken Dryden. But yeah, Dave Dryden was a pretty good goaltender in his own right. April 4th of 1971, Bobby Orr sets records for goals, assists, points by a defenseman. He is the NHL's best defenseman, and it's not close. The Hart Trophy goes to Bobby Orr. The Art Ross goes to Phil Esposito. The Calder goes to Gilbert Perreault of the Buffalo Sabres, who won that draw that Vancouver had hoped and thought they won until they didn't. So Vancouver drafts Dale Talon. It's just that difference right there. And it sets up Buffalo for success in the 70s. Vancouver just is mediocre throughout the 70s and most of the 80s as well. The Vezina Trophy is split between Jacquemin and Villemur for the New York Rangers. The Lady Byng goes to Johnny Busick of the Boston Bruins. The Masterton goes to Jean Rattel of the New York Rangers. The Lester Pearson Award is introduced that season, and Phil Esposito wins it. So this is, of course, the award granted where the NHLPA votes on who they believe the best player in the league is. So the Hart Trophy goes to Bobby Orr. The Lester Pearson goes to Phil Esposito, both, of course, Bruins. The Norris goes to Bobby Orr because this is the 3rd of 8 straight years he's going to have that award. The Conn Smythe goes to Ken Dryden. So the Montreal Canadiens, they made the right decision in switching up the goaltending when they got to the playoffs. So the All-Stars in the NHL that year, at center, you have Phil Esposito, the Bruins' first-team All-Star. Second-team All-Stars, Dave Keon of the Toronto Maple Leafs. On the right side, Ken Hodge of the Boston Bruins, first-team All-Star. Yvon Cornwallier of the Montreal Canadiens, second team. Left wing, Johnny Busick of Boston, first star, and Bobby Hull is the second-team All-Star. On the blue line, Bobby Orr of the Bruins and J.C. Tremblay of the Montreal Canadiens are your first-team All-Stars. Brad Park of the New York Rangers and Pat Stapleton of the Chicago Blackhawks, second-team All-Stars. In net, Eddie Jacquemin for the New York Rangers, first-team All-Star. Jacques Plante, now playing in Toronto, is the second-team All-Star in the National Hockey League. So your leading scorer that year is Phil Esposito, who sets all kinds of records. 78 games, 76 goals, 76 assists, 152 points. Pretty good year. Bobby Orr for Boston, 78 games as well, 37 goals, 102 assists, 139 points. That's pretty good. Johnny Busick, also with the Boston Bruins, 78 games, 51 goals, 65 assists, 116 points. Easily the best season of Johnny Busick's career offensively. Ken Hodge for Boston, 78 games as well, 43 goals, 62 assists, 105 points. Bobby Hull in Chicago, 78 games, 44 goals, 52 assists for 96 points. Norm Ullman, now in Toronto, 73 games, 34 goals, 51 assists for 85 points. The goaltending numbers, Tony Esposito leads the way for Chicago. 35, 14, and 7 record, 919 save percentage, 6 shutouts. It's going to hold up a 5, and it's like, no, that's a 6. Eddie Johnston for Boston, 36 and 2 record, 914 save percentage, 4 shutouts. Jerry Cheevers in Boston, a record of 27, 8 and 5, 918 save percentage, 3 shutouts. Ed Jockman in New York, 27, 10 and 7 record, 922 save percentage, and 8 shutouts. So Jockman had a pretty good year. And the goaltending still really, really solid in the 70s. Again, people always talk about goaltending in the 80s was terrible. The goaltenders weren't as terrible as the fact that, their equipment was out of date and the offense just keeps getting better throughout the 70s and it peaks in the 80s. So the quarterfinals, again, I'm just going through game by game with the semifinals and the final. Eventually it'll be the quarterfinals and the finals. But Minnesota beats St. Louis in 6 games. Chicago sweeps the Philadelphia Flyers. The New York Rangers beat Toronto in 6 games. Montreal beats Boston in 7 games because it's a bad matchup for Boston. So even though Boston finishes 24 points ahead of Montreal, it doesn't matter come playoff time. Montreal beats them in 7. The semifinals, it's the Rangers and the Blackhawks meeting. The Rangers beat Chicago 2-1 at home in overtime. Chicago ties the series with a 3-0 win. The Rangers then get the lead back with games at home. 4-1 win in Game 3 before losing Game 4 at home, 7-1 to Chicago. So series is tied again. Chicago wins Game 5 in overtime, 3-2. New York Rangers win Game 6 in triple overtime, 3-2. And then Chicago wins Game 7 by a score of 4-2 to win the series, 4-3. The other matchup is the Minnesota North Stars and the Montreal Canadiens. This is a complete and total mismatch. But the Minnesota North Stars, when they're underdogs, they play pretty well. Montreal wins 7-2 in the first game. Minnesota bounces back with a 6-3 win in Game 2. Montreal goes into Minnesota, wins 6-3 in Game 3 before Minnesota wins Game 4, 5-2 to tie the series at 2. Montreal then wins 6-1 at home, goes into Minnesota and wins 3-2. Survive a bit of a scare. They win that series in 6 games. So you move on to the Stanley Cup Final where it is Montreal and Chicago. So an original 6 matchup. Chicago wins 2-1 in the first game in overtime. Chicago then wins over Montreal 5-3. Montreal wins both games at home to follow that up by scores of 4-2 and 5-2. So with the series tied, Chicago wins at home 2-0. Montreal wins at home 4-3. So we go to Game 7. Montreal wins the first road win of the Stanley Cup Final is in fact Game 7 by Montreal 3-2. So it is a 7-game series win for the Montreal Canadiens. They are Stanley Cup champions yet again. In that Stanley Cup Final, Hull had 3 goals and 6 assists in that 7-game series, 9 points in the 7-game series. Jim Pappen had 4 goals and 2 assists. Stan Mikita had a goal and 4 assists. Dennis Hull had 3 goals and an assist for Chicago. Esposito had a .904 save percentage in the final with 1 shutout. On the Montreal side, the Mahovlich brothers had themselves a series. Frank scores 4 goals, 4 assists. Peter scores 5 goals, 2 assists. Yvon Cornway, 4 goals, 2 assists. Jean Beliveau, in what would be his final games, of course, 1 goal, 3 assists for him. Henri Richard, 2 goals and an assist. And Mark Tardif was playing on that Montreal team. He had no points and -3 in the Stanley Cup Final. He would go on and be pretty good in the WHA, and then he had a nice solid run at the NHL after that. And then Ken Dryden, a .921 save percentage in the final. He didn't have a shutout, didn't need one. Montreal wins the series in 7. So there you go. You guys are caught up in the 1970-71 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I suspect these videos are going to keep getting longer because there's more teams to talk about. There's more to talk about. And yeah, so keep that in mind when you're planning out, how you're going to watch my videos. Anyways, like people plan their day around any of that. Anyways, all right. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.